Welcome back to Sailor's Disgrace. Today we will be conducting an interview with Astrid Parks. Astrid Parks is a survivor of military sexual assault. She is going to share her story. I'd like to give a trigger warning. Some of the details in this story are alarming and graphic and may be difficult for some listeners. So, Astrid was born and raised in Oregon and now resides in Florida with her four dogs, two cats, and emotional support husband. She enjoys writing, cosplay, performing, playing video games, and diving into philosophy. You can normally find her behind a computer screen in costume at a local comic convention or hanging out with her 60 plus dogs she watches on occasion. So, everyone, please give a warm welcome to Astrid as she shares her story. All right, good morning, Astrid. Thanks so much for joining us. I really appreciate you being here and your willingness to share your story with me and with our audience. How are you doing today?
I'm doing fabulously. I'm looking forward to sharing my story and hopefully just spreading awareness of what happens behind closed doors at some of these isolated stations. Talking with Megan, I know you had her on your podcast not too long ago. We shared a lot of similarities in our experiences. So her bringing her story forward just really helped me share mine as well.
Fantastic. I'm glad to hear that you gained some perspective with Megan's story, with my story, and that's kind of the whole point of this. Like we met up a few months ago, recording our stories for the Coast Guard. And obviously, my podcast has been going on for a while, but the whole idea is just to share and to hopefully reach people that need to be reached, and to give them a voice and put them on that path of healing. So I'm glad that you were able to find that. So to kick things off, just a little bit of background. So where did you grow up, and why did you join the Coast Guard? What kind of goals did you have, goals and aspirations when you joined the Coast Guard?
So I was born and raised in Oregon in a small town called Sandy. I grew up very tight knit family. We all four of us had each other. I had a little brother, two parents, kind of just the picture perfect family life in a way from the outside. Um, and then I got really into marine biology my junior year of high school, and I really wanted to become a marine biologist. But unfortunately, just with the way the job market was, I knew that getting that degree would be a long and arduous process, and I didn't have the money for it. So I ended up going Coast Guard because I really wanted to become an MST.
That was the best job in the Coast Guard. That's what I did for for a while. I was a chief MST before making warrant. So
Yeah.
absolutely, it's a great job. So what other goals did you have though? Obviously, you wanted to kind of get environmental field. Was there anything about the military itself, or in the Coast Guard in particular, that attracted you to the service?
So, kind of the funny story with that is I was the first generation in four generations to join the military, and I was the first woman to join the military. Um, I initially had looked into the Air Force at first. I brought it to my parents' attention, and when I told my mom I wanted to join the Air Force, she started crying, and she's like, "Please look into other options." And I had a friend who was going to boot camp, and she was like, "You should go to boot camp. You should join the Coast Guard. It's smaller, it's more tight knit." And I told my parents, and they supported me. And I signed the dotted line. And on September 11th, 2012, I was shipped off to boot camp.
Wow, wow. And do you mind if I ask how old were you at that time?
I was freshly 18. I grew up in a very sheltered household. I was very religious, worked at Bible camps, was very involved in the church. So, kind of going from point A to point B so quickly, jumping into the deep end of adulthood, that's really what it felt like for me. And seeing all these experiences for the first time, it was very eye opening, but it was really scary too.
Yeah, I mean it's a big commitment for an 18, well, for anybody, but especially that age. You're so young and impressionable, and you get thrown
Oh,
into
yeah.
this environment, and hopefully it's a positive one. You go through boot camp, and you get indoctrinated into the system. Do you mind talking about your boot camp experience a little bit?
Oh my god, it was so hard. I was definitely one of those people who struggle being again being very young, being very sheltered. I didn't really know which way was up, and I definitely found myself floundering in boot camp. But Honestly, I do owe a lot of my success to the company commanders that I had. I had a BM1. Her name was Petty Officer Phillips, and she was absolutely incredible. And she showed me that you could be a badass woman and be in the military and everything like that. So I really looked up to her. And if she hadn't been my company commander, I probably would have washed out. To be completely honest with you.
Wow. So you found strength in one person, during that. It's only 8 weeks, but it can be a long 8 weeks, and people do wash out, and it's very common because they do put a
Mm-hmm.
lot of pressure on us, and rightly so. We should be put in pressure because you're expected to perform at a different level once you report to your first unit, whether that's a station or a cutter or whatever it might be. There's a lot that's going to be demanded of you, so it's a trial run, it's a test, and if you pass the test, you get put into the fleet. So kind of talk about that for a second. Like you go through boot camp and you go to your first assignment. So how did that feel leaving boot camp, and then kind of talk about that transition into your first unit, what that was like?
So I actually ended up getting stationed back in Oregon, about 2.5 hours away from my family's house. So it was nice because I knew I still had that separation, but I still had that family ties that were close enough to where I could go home. Um, but leaving boot camp, the 5 days afterwards, at those 5 days of leave, everything just kind of shifted for me, and I was like, "Holy shit! I'm an adult now. I have to go and do all these things." And going to that first duty station, it was like looking over the edge of the abyss and just jumping in. That's honestly how I felt. Was just looking into the void and going, "Okay, this is it. Let's
Yeah,
go."
yeah. It's trial by fire. Like you got to go, and that's it. um, so once you got to your unit, what was your first unit? You said it was close to home.
It was stationed Tillamook Bay in Garibaldi, Oregon. It's a small boat station about an hour and a half away from Portland.
Okay, yeah. And were you excited? I know you said you're nervous, obviously, but did you feel like you were ready to serve and ready to be a part of the Coast Guard at that point?
I was optimistic. I think that's the best way to describe it. I was optimistic to make a change, and I was optimistic to save lives. And I was a lifeguard actually before I joined the Coast Guard for about 3 years. And so going from life saving in a pool to life saving in the ocean seemed a natural choice for me. And
Sure.
life lives is the most satisfying thing you can do as a person. And I wanted to do that. And so I was optimistic. I was happy. I was excited. But again, very nervous.
Sure. You're nervous. You go to this first unit, and then how was that culture when you first got to the station Tillamook? What Do you mind talking about your arrival at the unit and how it felt and how you were treated?
Absolutely. So I felt like a fish out of water, very much so. I think that's really the best way to put it. Because going from a very sheltered life from a Christian family, from this very religious upbringing to being in a place where, mix of cultures, mix of religions, but for the most part, everybody was decently welcoming, and they did want to help me out to find my footing. Um, but I was actually told, I think it was the first week I was there, that there had actually been a sexual assault with another non-rate and another in a BM1 in the radio room that we had at the station, and that had happened 6 months prior to when I was there.
Wow. And was that BM1 still stationed there, or what had happened to that person?
He got moved, actually. I think he got moved up to Sector Columbia River, and he remained there. I do not know if he's still in. I didn't know much about it, and again, that's not my story to tell. Um,
Sure.
but I did know it happened, and I know what happened, like what she went through when everything was going on, because I was told through somebody who was still friends with her. So it was kind of like through the grapevine. I knew what was going on, but at the same time, I'm like, that's never going to happen to me because nobody's ever even looked at me like that. So it's not going to happen to me. I'm fine.
Yeah, so you had that confidence, kind of like the lightning never strikes twice in the same place, that it
Hmm.
happened once, it was taken care of, hopefully. You would hope that your command had addressed the climate issues around that. But, you're brand new in the Coast Guard, so you don't even know how to ask those questions, really, or to
Hmm.
fully grasp it. Like you say, you're a fish out of water. So you're just testing it out and seeing what's going on. And you smell that blood in the water, so to speak, but you kind of ignore it, hoping that it's not going to affect you. So we spoke previously about this incident, and you talked about being groomed for what happened to you shortly after reporting to the station. Can you talk about that grooming and how that impacted you and what to look out for?
Oh, absolutely, yes. So I think it was the summer of 2013, I was 19 and we had a BM2 that was moved to the state from the East Coast. So upon reporting, I was really into like nerdy things. I was a geek, still am, and he was too. And so we'd sit down and we'd talk video games and comic books and stuff like that. And he was my boss, and so he put like in the comms room, we'd just shoot the shit for hours. And we'd play Legend of Zelda together in my barracks rooms for hours, and he would like take me out shooting, and we'd go fishing, and he taught me how to do a lot of these things that I didn't know how to do because I was so young and because I grew up in that sheltered life. And at the time, I didn't realize it, but he was slowly isolating me from the rest of the station, at least on a personal level. And it really didn't occur to me what was going on at that time because I thought to myself, this is a person who's giving me attention. He's my friend. I trust him. He's my boss. I think he's got my best interest for me at heart. And I trust him. And I didn't realize at the time, but that was like the first steps was him getting me to trust him to the point where I was comfortable with being alone with him.
Wow.
And that was the isolation. That's the biggest thing that predators want to do is they want to isolate their victims away from people that can help them.
Yeah, unfortunately, that's a very common tactic with predators. They kind of play that slow game, and they'll earn your trust, earn your seek validation, and allow you to, like you said, isolate to take you away from the crowd. I often think of it like a wolf hunting sheep. They'll pick off one sheep and let the rest of the herd run away. It's terrifying. So this person was grooming you, and so that it got to a point though where things crossed a line. Can you talk about that and what led to your incident?
Yeah, absolutely. So it was December of 2013, and he invited me over because I would go over to his house all the time and we'd hang out and watch movies, like, you know, buddies, pals, homies, whatever. And so he invited me over for movies because I was off duty, and I'm like, yeah, cool, but whatever. And his roommate, who was an MK3 at the station, he was on duty that night, so there was nobody else in the house. It was just me and him. And I texted him and I'm like, hey, do you want to go see the new Hobbit movie that just came out? Because we're both really big Lord of the Rings fans. And he's like, yeah, sure, come over. We can have some drinks, and then we can go. And I was like, cool, bet, let's go. So I go over and I end up drinking like 4 or 5 beers. And at that point, I'm decently intoxicated just because I've only drank a couple times before. Um, and he pins me down and he starts kissing me. And I was shocked. I didn't know how to react. I kind of just let it happen. It was the deer in the headlights thing. And I remember saying, what about the movie? I want to go see the movie. And he said, this is a lot better than seeing a movie. And he took off my top. And I remember just being so uncomfortable and just feeling like my skin was crawling. And I remember, him just putting his hands all over. And finally, I told him to stop, and he did, and he let me go. Um, and he knew I was a virgin, but this was like the first time I had ever been sexually wanted by somebody, and I thought it was normal to feel that way. And so after that, I went back and what, and he got me drunk again. And what started off as quote unquote consensual because I was drunk, he took my virginity, and he took his condom off without me knowing, and he came inside me, without me knowing, so I didn't know what was going on. And I told him to stop, and he didn't. And I ragdolled. That's all I could do was ragdoll. And that was the first time, and I kept going back to him over and over again because I thought that was normal.
Wow. I'm sorry to hear that. And you mentioned that ragdoll feeling, and you said that even the first time when he pinned you down and kissed you, you froze, and that's a very common, in these instances. It's the fight or flight or freeze, um, and many of us freeze. I know that personally, and
Mm-hmm.
you just sometimes you disassociate. You don't even feel like you're there, and you hyper focus on different things in the room potentially, and you're just not present in the moment because you're just so uncomfortable. And even if you can't say the words no, which it sounds like you did that second time, at least it's not consensual. It's not wanted, and it's deeply troubling. And I'm so sorry that you went through that. But so you said that this happened for a while. Is that correct?
It did, yeah. So I thought it was normal. I thought it was a normal relationship, and I wanted to feel wanted so bad because I had never really had this relationship with anybody else before, and I thought it was normal. And so I wanted to feel wanted. I wanted to feel like I mattered, like as a woman and as a person. I wanted to feel desired, and he, in some fucked up way, made me feel desired, but he would hold his power over my head to get what he wanted. And he would push me away all the time. And that was the thing, like we would be together, and then he would text me like an hour later and go, "This isn't working. This is over." And then he would text me again, 2 days later and say, "Hey, come over." And it was just this back and forth, back and forth, back and forth, back and forth, over and over again in this awful cycle of abuse.
Wow. I'm sorry. And did obviously he used it on a personal level. Did he ever use his power professionally? So you mentioned he was higher ranking than you. Did that ever come into play, like at work?
No, fortunately, that never did. But the thing with work was I'm very sure that people knew what was going on, and nobody ever tried to stop it. And nobody ever approached me and say, "Dude, you need to stop. Like, this is fucked up. She's 20. She's 21. You're 29.
Yeah. Yeah.
You're her boss. Like, that's fucked up, dude." Nobody ever approached him. Nobody ever said that. And then, if it was ever mentioned in passing, it was my fault. I was the problem. I was the psycho one. I was the crazy one who was trying to ruin this BM2's career.
Right. Victim blaming, right? It's a very real
Exactly.
thing.
Mm-hmm.
Man. So you had that going on at work where people would take his side.
Mm-hmm.
Um, so with that, like, did you ever feel any kind of comfort or have any resources that you felt like you could reach out to at that time to speak up and to say something?
So, to be completely honest with you, at that point in my life, I didn't feel like I was being abused or sexually assaulted. I felt like everything was normal. And I think that was the biggest catalyst for me to not getting help, was because I thought it was normal. And if I known what I know now, outside looking in, I would have gone and I would have gotten help in that moment. But unfortunately, at being a little 22, 21-year old, your brain isn't isn't thinking all the way through, and you're thinking this is just regular, this is common, this is fine.
Right, right. So it's akin to I'm sorry to bring it up if it brings any pain, but like child abuse and things like that, where they normalize it, because they don't know any different,
Mm-hmm.
if, especially if it's a relative or a close family friend or something like that. It's that's what these people do. These predators will use that to their advantage, and I'm so sorry that that happened to you, at such a young age. Um, and the fact that you were so wrapped up in it that you couldn't see outside of it,
Mm-hmm.
to realize that there was an issue and to reach out for help. Um, was there ever a point where you did reach out for help? I don't know if I'm jumping too far ahead chronologically, but we can always circle back. But
No, you're
do you
fine,
ever
you're
get
fine.
do you ever get to that point where you realize how wrong this all was? And
It took a very long time. Actually, it actually happened about a month and a half ago. Everything was coming out with Listen to B and Coast Guard Right the Ship, and everything like that was coming out, and I was finally able to take a step back and look at everything from a different angle because I am a decade older. I am older, wiser. I understand now what happened to me, and going back and looking at all of these memories and going, holy shit, I was abused. I was sexually taken advantage of. I was groomed. And that was really kind of the biggest catalyst was the outside looking in.
sure, yeah. I'm glad that you're able to gain that perspective, and and that's another common thing too with survivors. It's especially at a young age. A lot of times we can't comprehend, what had happened. We either isolate it or bury it or suppress it in some way to survive,
Mm-hmm.
and act like it was normal or completely ignore it, and it takes time, and sometimes it's you don't realize the damage that's been done, and like you say, a decade later, all of a sudden you have these triggers and these things that are happening, and you start to connect the dots. You start putting the pieces together of your own life and realizing how damaging, sometimes catastrophic, these incidents and toxic relationships. I wouldn't even call that a relationship that you had. If that's okay, I would definitely just call that a you were just clearly taken advantage of. It wasn't
Mm-hmm.
consensual at all, so it's not a relationship. It's an abuse of power and trust. Um, but you start to put all that stuff together, and you realize how you act as a person and how you react to certain situations, and um, I don't I don't always like putting labels on things, but it does help people to heal and to recognize where they are in their lives. So like PTSD, complex PTSD, it's you start to recognize those symptoms, and you can receive diagnoses from professionals, and it just validates everything that you went through. And I think that's a crucial step in healing, is to first identify and to accept what had happened to you and how it's impacting your life. And it seems like you are starting that process, and I'm proud of you for doing that, and I know how difficult it is. So keep up the good work, and try, reach out for help and all that stuff. There's a lot of resources, and we'll talk about that at the end. I feel like we're kind of jumping ahead, but um, with what you're saying, when this all happened to you, at what point did that end with that BM2?
So everything kind of came to a head. I was really depressed, and so I was on the MST list for about 2.5 years. And then I do not remember the name of the testing off the top of my head, but you had to take it right before you went to A school. Uh,
Yes, the
they
EPME test, I think.
Thank you. Yeah, the EPME test. So I was trying to pass that, and my head was so wrapped up in everything. I kept failing it again and again. Everybody just kept going to the top. They kept passing me. It was so disheartening to see that and just have that hanging over my head. And so finally I said, fuck it. I don't want to be an MSD anymore. I'm going operations specialist. I'm getting the fuck away from the station.
Yeah, Yeah, and we often do that to get out of a situation. It's kind of it's interesting. Not to bring it about myself, but I did the same thing to get out of mine, and at that time MST was wide open, so I was like 3 months, to wait on the list 20 years ago. So totally
Yeah,
different situation, and it worked out for me in its own way. But yeah, you just find that quick escape, that it's like that eject button, like on a James Bond car or something. It's like, all right, I'm gonna hit this and get the hell out of here. So you did that.
exactly.
You went OS, and then what happened after that?
So after that, I went to A school and down in sweet, sweet Petaluma in California.
Mm-hmm.
And he would text me almost every day, and he would tell me that he missed me and that he wanted to be with me and that he wanted me to come back to Oregon so we could be together as an actual couple. And so I believed him. And so I put in for Sector Columbia River because I was like, we're going to make a life together. This is what's going to happen. And he, one day, out of the blue, just stopped talking to me, stopped answering his messages. And I found out that he had been seeing another person, another woman who was a civilian who lived in that town in Tillamook. And so that started a whole thing because she would text me nasty things and I would text her nasty things. And then she told my old senior chief that I had said derogatory things about her son who was special needs. And so that started a thing. And I never said anything like that, mind you. I am petty, but I'm not that petty. Um, and so that started a whole thing. And finally, I was like, you know what? I don't want to go anywhere near that man. Send me as far away as you possibly can. And I ended up getting stationed at Sector Guam in Santa Rita, Guam.
That's pretty far away from Oregon.
6,000 miles to be exact.
Yeah, hopefully that was enough distance for you. Did he continue pursuing you at all once you separated geographically like that, or was it?
He tried.
Mm-hmm.
He tried. But I blocked him on everything because I'm like, I don't want to deal with it. And in Guam, my mental health really took a nosedive, like really, really bad. And I went through really major depression episodes. I tried to kill myself a couple times. And the biggest thing for me that I was trying to cope with everything with was alcohol. And yep. I turned to alcohol very heavily.
Yes, and that's another common thing, coping mechanisms and substance abuse and alcohol use. Very, very common, unfortunately, with people that go through the things that we go through. So I'm sorry you went through that. So when you were in Guam, you're having all this difficulty. Were you able to reach out for help through the Coast Guard at all and through your command, like for mental resources, therapy, any kind of medical care or attention?
So I didn't start going to therapy. Unfortunately, the therapist that I had been matched with didn't really work out for me. And because I was in such a state of crisis, I was trying to find whatever I could, wherever I could. So I would go to bars, I'd drink until I couldn't see straight, and then go home with the first person I saw. And that was my coping mechanism. And that was my self-destructive tendencies, was I just wanted to die. And that was the closest thing I could get to it, was just being as brash as it is, slutty as possible.
No, that's understandable too. You're, like you said, it's just the closest thing to to dying or even feeling something sometimes. Just to numb the pain. We do terrible things sometimes to ourselves, and it's okay to forgive ourselves, as well, with the passage of time, especially. So, yeah.
But to answer your question, honestly, with doing therapy through the military and the Navy, I had a psychiatrist who did slut shame me and who basically told me I was a whore for doing what I was doing. And so that turned me off to go into any sort of therapy for about a year and a half. But again, I was drinking so heavily. So finally, I actually went into alcohol recovery the second level of um, intensity. I don't remember what it is called, but
Probably like
I did
a intensive outpatient, maybe.
yeah,
Yep.
but I had to go to AA. I didn't go to AA. I had to go to therapy. I did not go to therapy. I did not stop drinking because I was still mentally just fucked up because I hadn't dealt with any of the trauma. And eventually that led to me being masted and I was dropped down in rape. I became a SNOS, a semen operations specialist, lost my clearance, and was kicked out of the military.
Wow. And at no point did with your therapy did you open up in therapy about your abuse?
Nope, never did.
Yeah, and that was never even approached or questioned, like the cause, the root cause of why you were doing all these things.
No, no, it was never addressed. It was my problem alone. I had the issues, but it was only surface level to them. It was never anything deeper.
So that's them being your medical care. What about your command in Guam? Was it the
Oh
same
God,
situation?
my first captain, Captain Pruitt, he is out now. I loved him. He was a father to me. Like, um, truly, I don't think I could have gotten through what I got through on Guam without him. And he was a phenomenal captain. But after he retired, we did get another captain, and he was definitely more like strict by the books, and he did not like me for obvious reasons, and I knew he didn't like me, which was fine because I also didn't like me. But with that, I did feel like it was a little vindictive. Getting masted and then going and getting my DD 214 and being told you can never reenlist again.
Wow. And did you want to stay in the Coast Guard? Were you
I,
still?
I did, honestly. A part of me really wanted to stay in, but a part of me really wanted to get out. I think the bigger part of me wanted to stay in because I did very much enjoy the work I was doing. I liked being able to save lives. I very much enjoyed being that person that people could turn to in crisis. And in a way, I still am that person many people do turn to in crises because I am a strong, stable voice. So
Yeah, that's awesome. That's
yeah,
great that you found your voice and you're able to advocate for people. And people can sense that. That's great. That's fantastic. So I guess I'll put a hypothetical out there. So you talk about your first captain was great and very helpful. Second captain, not so much. But had someone in your chain of command like really been an advocate for you and said, "All right, this person is clearly struggling. Something's going on." Could it have been a simple intervention and someone just sitting you down and asking why these things are happening or how they could possibly help you instead of just, it seems to me it was more just punitive in nature, like, oh, this person's a screw up, this person's trouble, they're doing all this crazy stuff, let's get rid of this as fast as we can. But
yeah.
and again, hypothetically, had someone, a good chief or first or lieutenant or whatever, just said, hey, Parks, looks like you're having some serious problems here, like let's peel this back, like what's going on. Would that have changed anything, you think?
To be completely honest with you, I'm not sure just because I don't know if I would have been able to separate what was normal from what was abnormal at that point in that relationship. I
Yeah.
don't think at that point I was ready to talk about it in the extent that it was abuse. I was groomed. I was a victim. I probably would have been like, oh my god, I had a relationship with my BM2 at my old station. Like, I'm sorry, that was my fault.
Yeah. Yeah, you blame yourself, right? That's that mental game that was played on you, and again used to his advantage. And like you mentioned, like when you first reported to your station, that there was already a history of sexual assault at the unit. So there's kind of a stigma floating around, and perceptions, and you could easily fall into that trap. So I completely get that, and not being able to separate yourself from what had happened because you're self-medicating at that point in Guam, and you're not able to see through it. So who knows? And hypotheticals are it's just that, like, who knows? And I asked that just to posit, like, maybe if you had a stronger leadership or someone that you could truly trust, that it could have somehow gotten you through that fog potentially. But it's I don't know. Just listening to it now, it's like it's so hard to fathom, and I've seen it before in the service where people play this game of hot potato, so to speak, where it's like someone's trouble. Let's get rid of this thing as fast as possible. They're screwing up. Let's not get to the real issue here. Let's kick it out and move on with our lives. And it seems like that's kind of what happened to you. Would you agree to that?
Oh, absolutely, 100%.
Yeah.
Actually, the best thing I did on Guam that happened to me on Guam was I met my husband. Um, and he was there for me through the entire getting out process and separation process, and he would tell me all the time the Coast Guard really fucked you over. The
Yeah.
Coast Guard dropped the ball, and I was like, no, it was my fault, it wasn't their fault. And I'm like, yeah, the Coast Guard really dropped the ball.
Yeah, it certainly seems that way. And I'm sorry, I'm so glad that you found someone that you can trust, um, and someone that's, I mean, in what year were you discharged?
I was discharged in 2019, so it just hit 5 years in April.
Wow. Okay. Congratulations.
Thank you.
Yeah. And how has life been since leaving the Coast Guard?
The first year was rough. I think that was the hardest year of my life. Again, I ended up in the psych ward. Again, I tried to unalive myself. But honestly, the biggest change for me was finding things I was passionate about and finding my drive and finding my voice again. And I found it through a lot of therapy, and I found it through a lot of anger and frustration. And I still have a lot of that anger and frustration, but it's manageable now. And I understand why I have it. And it's getting better every day.
That's awesome. That's great. I often talk about that with people, and like you said, the healing powers of therapy, and then like first like identifying those issues and identifying where these things come from is such a big part of it, and being able to address them in healthy ways. Not getting blackout drunk anymore, or or life risking behaviors, and it's a game changer. So that's so cool that you're able to do that now. Um, what other challenges have you had since you've left, and talk about some of your successes as well? You mentioned that you're finding ways to find your voice and do things that you love. Kind of highlight those two things if you don't mind.
Of course, yeah. So kind of the biggest thing is I'm a very creative soul. I love being the spotlight. I love being the center of attention when I'm performing. So I do burlesque on the side, and that's just me celebrating my body and all that it's done for me. So that is a big way of just expressing myself and loving myself, loving the body that's taken me through hell and back, basically. And then another thing that really helps me is writing. And I right now I'm working on my first novel, and I'm really excited to have it done. And the characters, they definitely have a big piece of me, and it's been fun to explore that because it's a different avenue that I really haven't explored of myself in my writing.
That's awesome, and I look forward to reading that someday. Yeah, artistic expression and comfort with yourself. Those are huge, and I applaud you for that. That's great that you're finding peace and growth through all those things. That's so cool. So I guess we're kind of wrapping things up. So if do you have any departing words, or um, actually, I do have, sorry, one more question I think I should kind of highlight is if you had someone that was wanting to join the service, either Coast Guard or any of the other branches, what advice would you give that person? And particularly, like, imagine yourself in that position. What advice would you give to 18-year-old Astrid about joining?
Be vigilant. Be aware of who has your best interest at heart, because there are many, many wolves weapons and sheep's clothing in the military, and they go unnoticed. They walk among you, and you have to we have to look for the warning signs, and we have to call people out when we see the warning signs, and we have to bring it to our command's attention when we see people struggling, and when we know that's going on. We need to make this so much bigger of an issue than it is, basically, and speak up, speak loud, make your voice be heard. In the military, you are a member of the armed forces, sure, but you're still a person too. Never forget that.
That's wonderful, and I love how you said that you're still a person. We're not just a uniform, and we represent something bigger than ourselves. That's true, but each of us is just a human. We're just trying to get through this life and make the best of it that we can. And it's okay to recognize when something bad is happening to you or even to a shipmate, and to be able to speak up and say no to things that are harmful and behaviors that are wrong and actions that are criminal. It's okay to speak up, and I think there are a lot of avenues for that. And I appreciate you speaking up now, and I appreciate you coming to this podcast and advocating for yourself. I think it's awesome, and it shows just how far you've come as a person. And I really do applaud you for that, Astrid. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you. I really appreciate it, and just the ability to share my story and be open and vulnerable with everything. It's very free, and I just want to again say that you're not alone. You're not alone in your story. You're not alone in your experience. Find your people. Find your voice, and find the community. We're stronger together.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I couldn't have said it better myself. We are not alone. We are strong, and we are worth it, and we're here for each other. And I'm happy to have met you, and I'm looking forward to working together in the future. Do you have any departing words at all? Anything else that you want to say before we end the interview here?
For the record, I will never say I regretted my time in the Coast Guard. I made one of my best friends in the Coast Guard. Her name is Freya. Love her. But I do wish that grooming was spoken about and taught about and trained about, because if the warning signs are there and people cannot see them, if they don't know what to look for, then it's going to continue to be a silent problem.
Excellent. Yeah, and it does come down to training, and at those inception points, I like to call them, the academy, the Coast Guard, boot camp, any of the branches, when you get in, and to put that into, and I've heard this potentially will happen, like especially with the boot camp recruits, is you go through your 8 weeks, and then you get training on this stuff. So you're not getting that training while you're being yelled at and while you're doing push-ups and scrambling, because you're going to forget it. But it's kind of like a post boot camp training that they're talking about that's going to cover things like sexual assault and harassment and hazing, and really hone in on those recruits. Potentially, they're talking like a week-long course in Yorktown for every recruit. So who knows if that'll actually happen? It takes a lot of time, money, and resources, and sometimes that's hot air. But it's a great idea, And I think including what you're saying, like training on grooming, especially, and positional abuse of power, and where to talk, and how, what number you can call if this does happen, and it doesn't have to be your chain of command. It can be this, like I think those are all fantastic things, and I appreciate the fact that you bring that up, and also it's kind of interesting. I've spoken to a lot of people about these assaults and harassment cases, and pretty much everyone I talk to says the same thing you said. It's like, I still don't hate the Coast Guard. I still enjoyed serving. I still, I still care about this stuff, and I think that's why we're here. I think that's why we're talking about this stuff, is because we care about each other and we care about ourselves. But the Coast Guard as an organization does have a lot to offer and does amazing things every day. And there's a reason that we were drawn to it in the first place. We have humanitarian hearts, like we just want to help people. I think not all of us, obviously there's assholes out there that abuse us, but I think by and large we are an organization that's designed to take care of people, and it attracts those kinds of people in mass. And I'm glad that you kind of highlight that fact. It's really reassuring for me to hear that. So Um, yeah, Astrid, I thank you really so much for your time today, for your courage to speak, and for your perseverance and your self preservation. And I applaud you for how far you've come, and your dedication to yourself. I think that's awesome.
Thank you. I really appreciate it, and thank you so much for giving me the opportunity to share my story. It's very freeing, and I hope this helps a lot of people. I really do. Never
Yeah,
stop speaking. Never stop sharing your story.
awesome, 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 awesome. Thank you so much, Astrid. All right, with that, I'm gonna end the conversation. Thank you so much for everything, and you have a fantastic day.
Hey, you too. Thank you so much.
I'd like to say thanks again to Astrid for sharing her story with us. It was very impactful, very powerful, and I think she had a lot of great messages to share about healing and the dangers and warning signs of grooming. I think that's something that we haven't really talked about in this podcast, and I feel like she brought a great perspective on the matter. And I urge everyone to take heed of that, especially if you're in the service or just in life in general. If you have um, any situation where this may arise, just to be vigilant, like she said, and not to be paranoid, and not to fear everything and everyone, but to be vigilant and see those warning signs and to recognize them in your relationships and of those around you. Sometimes a person is so mired in what is happening that they can't see outside of it and to see that they are being victimized. And sometimes it takes a keen eye and an open mind to see what is going on and to address it properly. So, Astrid, thanks again for sharing your story and for being so open and honest with our audience. There's also, I'd like to remind people, several resources that you can tap into if you need help. Click on the website and on the homepage on Spotify and on Instagram. There's links for several resources. There's the DoD Safe Line. There is RAIN. There is local command structures within the Coast Guard and other branches. Just make yourself aware of what is out there. You can always reach out to me. We're here to help. We can share our voices, we can share our stories, and we can heal together. So please reach out at any time, and I mean that with all of you. So with that, I'll sign off. Again, I'd like to thank David Brown of Wayward Blues for the theme music, for providing it, and for setting the framework for this podcast. It always fits very well with our subject matter. So, again, thank you everyone for listening, and please, as always, take care of yourselves.